When you move beyond the trivial and start building some real-world enterprise Spring Boot applications, you quickly realize that the application properties file is the command and control center of your Spring Boot applications. Through that application properties file, you can configure Kafka queues, Tomcat servers, NoSQL databases. And it's not just about external resources. You can use it to configure the Spring framework itself, from logging to actuators to how auto configuration works. And you can use it to set up global properties of your own that can be accessed anywhere inside of your application. Understanding and mastering application properties in Spring Boot is what's going to take you one step closer to becoming that 10x Spring Boot developer that I know you want to be. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at the serverside.com. I have to be one of the world's biggest Spring and Spring Boot advocates. And if you give me just a few minutes of your time, I'm going to show you a few settings and a few configurations that are going to make life as a Spring Boot developer much more enjoyable. Starting off with a couple of ways to configure the Spring Boot framework itself. And that is what we're going to do next. Okay, before we get started, I'm just going to give you a suggestion. I tend to speak clearly and I speak at a moderate pace, but if you put these videos on 1.5 or 2x speed, you can go through it at twice the pace. And because I tend to speak clearly, even at 2x speed, it's fairly understandable. And of course, if there's something in there that you didn't understand or you want to take a look at more thoroughly, you can always rewind and pause. It's just a good suggestion for learning on YouTube in general. Now, the Spring application properties file is a fairly advanced concept. So I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about Spring Boot. Certainly, I've got a little hello world application here. I got a REST controller with a get mapping and a little endpoint that says /health check. And if I was actually to run this application, run as a Java application, well, I get all of this verbose logging here. I'm going to show you how to take care of that with application properties. And once it kicks off, I'm going to get this endpoint here, localhost 8080 health check, and it says situation normal, all fired up. And by the way, if you ever heard the term snafu, NS, that's what it stands for, situation normal, all fired up. That's actually the Christian version of it, but you get the idea. Okay, so here we go. Everything's working. It's working on localhost 8080. Now, let's say you didn't want to run this on localhost 8080. How could you change that? By the way, that's one of the most common Spring Boot interview questions. How do you change the port? Well, the port itself is actually configured in Tomcat at a low level through Catalina properties or something like that. But with Spring Boot, all you have to do is open up this magical application properties file and type in server.port equals 80. We'll do a dedication to the greatest hockey player of all time, Mario Lemieux. And, Mario Lemieux is 66. What am I doing? 8066. And now, when I run this application, this is going to, well, the application is restarting. You can see that console log. And now the application is going to run on port 8066. You can see that in the output right there, 8066. And then if I come over here and say hello to my good French friend Mario Lemieux, there you go, localhost 8086 /health check. All of a sudden we have changed the port on our application server. So there you go. That is just one example of how you might use the application properties file to do a configuration change. Super simple, super easy to do, and you can see that the change comes back almost instantaneously. Now, this is an example of configuring an external resource. Things get a little bit more interesting when you actually start configuring the Spring framework. I'll tell you something that annoys the life out of me. One thing that annoys the life out of me is this darn Spring banner all the time. It's like it's like when things aren't going well, I feel like it's mocking me. It's like, yes, this is Spring, and you don't know how to use it, but we're Spring. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to just turn that darn banner off. So I go into properties and I say spring.main.banner-mode off, and then I save my changes, and as soon as the thing changes, all of a sudden, right, I think if I just do a change in my code, all of a sudden Spring Boot will start up again, and maybe I'll need to do a reboot here. So let's reboot it. Web app. It'll start up again. And notice that as it starts up, I no longer have that banner up there. So I don't know. I think that is pretty cool. That's just one configuration change that you can make. Now, by the way, you can actually create your own banner if you want. So instead of saying Spring Banner off, okay, and that's how you comment out something in the properties file. Just throw in an octothorpe there. One of the things you can do is actually create your own banners. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to use my own banner here. And you see, I made that change and Spring Boot just started up. It's one thing that really annoys me. It annoys me when, like, I'm doing some work, because when you're working on a web application in Spring, the dev tools are configured so that anytime you make a change, well, it reboots it. So if I put a space in there and wait for a sec, see, it restarts the server. I just put a space in there. I don't need the server to restart every time I just put a space into my code. That just annoys the life out of me. I wish there was some way that I could turn off the restarting of the dev tools. Boom, there we go. Spring dev tools restart.enabled equals true. We can just switch that to false. And now I won't get the restarting of dev tools. It restarts there because it recognized a change. But now if I do another change, it's not going to restart on me. So, okay, I was just getting distracted a little bit there because, well, even in this tutorial, it's distracting. I just make a save and then all of a sudden the logging kicks off and there you go. That's another thing that you can do. If you want to turn off the auto start, that's a simple way to do it. Now, I would say, rather than turning off the auto start, what you can do is you can actually maybe change the amount of time that it takes to pull your environment for changes in code. So, if you make it 60 seconds, at least it won't restart every second. I think the default is 2 seconds. At least in this case, it'll take just a little bit of time. There's also something called a quiet period too. If you set the quiet period, it'll not only wait a little while to pull the system, but then before it actually recompiles your system, it'll wait 5 seconds. That's a good thing to do just in case it's trying to rebuild your code, but you're kind of in the middle of writing some code. So it'll recognize a change and wait for 5 seconds. And then after 5 seconds, if you made any changes, it'll incorporate those into it. Anyways, just couple of ways to configure your environment. Now, where was I? I was with the banner, right? Sorry, just getting so excited. I told you I was going to show you some super cool ways to accelerate development and make your life easier. Just playing around with application properties is one way to do it. Now, I did say that you can create your own banner. So I'm going to go in here and say, hey, I want to create a new file, and I'll call it my banner.txt. I'll click finish in there. And rather than turning the banner off, I just like to create a banner that's a little bit simpler. And here you can see I'm using a bunch of escape characters, escape code, a bunch of properties that are available to me through Spring Boot. So application title, application version, I think that might come from the POM or the Gradle file. The active profile. So sometimes when you're using Spring Boot, you might be running in a production profile. You might be working in a developer profile. You set up different profiles to have different settings and different customizations. In fact, all of these settings that I'm doing here, if you like them, you should create a developer profile. So these settings apply specifically to you and not to other people. But when I'm running my application, I like to check the profile that the application's actually running in, just so that I know, oh, okay, that connection to the database didn't work. Oh, for some reason I was on the production profile. And by the way, that is actually something you're supposed to set. If you do have multiple profiles, you set it up there. It'll just come back. I think it'll just print out the actual text there, Spring Profiles active, if something isn't actually set. But now I've made a change here. Let's go up, and I have to force the restart here because I don't want to wait the 60 seconds or whatever. But now I force this reset, and as you can see, I no longer have that big banner there. But I do get a little bit of information here. Active profile is dev and powered by Spring Boot 3.4. Now it looks like the title and the version didn't come out, but I do have the Spring application name. And so, why don't I go over there and just say the application name, click save, and then restart that web application, and boom, properties web, active profile, dev, powered by Spring Boot 3.3.4. That is a lot more interesting to me. And that is a lot more interesting to me than just going in and having some, I don't know, just some crazy, useless garbage that just clutters up my Spring application, just waste my time, and really is just largely childish. Who am I kidding? I love being childish. So, okay, so I start this up again. In my banner, I've put a little I love Java in there. And there you go. If you really want to get crazy, you can do that if you want. Okay. I told you I was going to show you some crazy, awesome application properties that you could configure here inside of your own applications that were going to make you a 10x developer. By the way, I did get that code on our website. I'll link to it in the description. I think I'll put a link up here, a video of it, me doing this. You can go online and somebody set up a website to create banners for you, and that's where I got that. So thank you to the person that invested a weekend putting that website together so I could have some ASCII art over there. Okay, a couple of things that annoy me as well. This is just a whole tutorial of things that annoy me. I don't like all of this here in the logging, right? I don't need all of that information. That is great, maybe in production, but as I'm doing development, all of this is not necessary to me. So another setting that I like to have is I like to do a setting like this, where I say, hey, when you log something out, just give me the time that it was logged out. I don't need the day. Not in my local environment. Like on the server you might, but not in my local environment. I just need the time. Maybe everything's chronological everywhere, so I don't even know if I need the time. Maybe the log level, and then the message is all that matters to me. And so now if I actually restart this or restart my web application, notice that the logging is a lot more concise. It's just telling me what I want. The timestamp, the log level, and then the actual message. To me, that's just cleaner. As I said, maybe you don't want to do that in production, but just as a local developer, to me, this is a lot nicer. I love Java, the name of the app, the profile I'm in, maybe the version of Spring Boot that you're using, put whatever you want in that banner, then, make the printouts a little bit more concise. In fact, I would even say, a lot of times, I actually just don't even want all the logs. I just, might want to set the logging level just to, hey, just give me a warning. Okay, don't give me all of the info stuff. And so now, if I set that logging threshold just to warn, well, when I come in here and I look at the console log, I don't get anything printed out, right? Like it's not doing any of that junk. And then if I do have any logs of my own, the way you can turn this off just for the Spring libraries, you can say just the Spring libraries, set it to warning. For my code, set it to info or trace. I got a whole tutorial on how to do Spring logging. So if you want to see how to do that, just check that out. But that's going to make it a lot cleaner. And so if I was actually to come over to my web app, and let's just do a system.out.println simple console message. Okay, so we do a little simple console message right there. And if I actually now I'm going to restart my app because I turned auto restart off. If I come over to my application now and do the health check, well, you can see that the simple console message comes up there, and it's not, buried in all of this other stuff. It's not buried in all of this other content. And to me, I think that makes everything look a whole lot better. So, okay, so there you go. That's an introduction to application properties, and that certainly shows you how those application properties can be used to help improve your development experience, right? Configure the logging level, configure what's configured when the application starts up. Stop the darn dev tools from restarting your app every 2 seconds, especially if you're just working on, domain classes, model classes, or documenting, tidying things up. Change the log level. So I think those are some cool things. Now, again, these are all configuration changes that are made largely to the Spring framework. We see server port, that's actually configuring an external resource itself. Now, one of the other cool things that you can do with the Spring Boot configuration application properties file is set up some of your own properties and configure your own properties for use. And that is what we're going to do next. Okay, I said that I was going to talk about setting up your own properties and how to access them in your code next. And I lied about that. Actually, what I want to show you is 2 things right now. I want to show you YAML files, and before that, I actually want to show you how you can override your application properties file at runtime. I mentioned that a bunch of these settings here probably are great for development, but they might not be great for production. When you run your application on the command line on the Java virtual machine, you've got the opportunity to provide arguments, and those arguments can override what is configured inside of your application properties file. Furthermore, if you deploy into Docker, you can provide an environment file. You can provide environment settings that will then override both the JVM level and the application properties file. So as you move your applications from one environment to another, people in those environments or using those deployment targets, be it a Java virtual machine or a Docker container, can override these. And I just want to show you an example of this. So as we know, the port that this application is running on is 8066. And we can see that running right there, right? There we go. Situation normal, all fired up. Now in Eclipse, and I'm using the Eclipse Spring Source tool suite here, you can always say run as and run configurations. And when you do this, this gives you the opportunity to set some arguments, specifically a virtual machine argument, not the command line argument, the virtual machine argument. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say -d, you're going to put it with this -d, server.port, and I'll say the server port is 80 Wayne Gretzky, right? 8099 here. I'll click apply for a second. And now I'm going to click run. The server port, you can see it right there. It still says 8066 on application properties. That's what's getting deployed right now. But when I run this application with that VM argument set, well, the application is going to start up. And there we go. I love Java. Unable to start the live reload server. That's fine with me. We don't want things to reload. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click on 80 Wayne Gretzky, 8099, and boom, all of a sudden our application runs. So we've just overridden that at the JVM level, right? We've said, hey, when I run this application, I'm going to override the application properties file by setting up this argument here, this virtual machine argument, and then that overrides this. Now again, if you were actually to go into Docker, you could set this at the Docker container level, which would override the VM, which would override the application properties file. And then furthermore, I think if you put it into Kubernetes, Kubernetes overrides Docker, which overrides. So you see the sort of cascading ability for people to override this. It becomes very powerful, not only using different deployment targets. A deployment target would be whether it's my local virtual machine, whether it's a virtual machine on a server, whether it's a Docker container. So those might be different places where you're actually going to deploy targets, but at the same time, just maybe different environments, right? So I want to have different settings for the database I want to connect to, or the database port that I'm using for the pre-prod server, which might be different from UAT, which might be different from prod, which might be different from local. And so each of those environments can override these settings too, whether it's a port, whether it's how logging happens, what the logging level is, or even what type of database or the database URL that you're using is. So that is incredibly powerful. And so that's one of the big compelling features of using application properties. Now, one of the other things about application properties is it's kind of getting usurped by application.yaml. So one of the things that we can now do with our Spring Boot applications, and if you're creating a brand new Spring application, it behooves you, I love that word behooves. It's so condescending. It behooves you to create an application.yaml file, not properties file. And as I like to say, the application YAML file is exactly the same as application properties, with the exception of the fact that it's completely different. That may not be helpful. But YAML is the syntax that's used to configure Docker. It's the syntax that's used to configure Kubernetes. A lot of cloud computing platforms, their configuration data is stored in YAML. And YAML is also a superset of JSON as well. So if you've got YAML configuration, it's real easy to provide some JSON to some of the deployment tools, and it can convert that very easily into the YAML that you need. Now over here on my application properties file, I've got all of these settings here, right? Okay, not too bad. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the YAML file. I'm going to comment them out here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace them with YAML. Okay, so now, instead of having a properties file, I've got a YAML file that has a nice tree-like structure. So notice DevTools gets repeated 3 times down here. Restart gets repeated 3 times down here. It's more structured, right? Spring DevTools. We say DevTools once. Then we say restart once. And for restart, we're going to enable it. We're going to pull for 30 seconds. We've got a quiet period of 1 second, and life is good. Here, we're going to say the banner mode is, I don't know, off. Is that one of the appropriate settings? What does it say, the different settings there? Console, log, or off. Okay, so why don't we keep it on, say console. But the idea is this should be a lot nicer than this. I don't know. What do you think? Does the right-hand side look a little bit more handsome, a little bit easier to manage than the right-hand side? I don't know, use some judgment here. It's not wrong to judge when it comes to YAML files. I think the right-hand side, it might take an experienced Spring developer to get used to it, but I think it's nice. I think it's more succinct, and this is the trend in the industry. Don't go rewriting your old Spring Boot applications, but I think this looks good. Now, you will notice, do we have anything that's conflicting from one side to the other? It looks like it doesn't. By the way, if you have a setting that exists both on the YAML file and in your properties file, the properties file will actually override it. So if I was to come over here and say that the banner mode was off. Why do I keep thinking of Batman when I talk about banner? When the banner mode is off, that should override the YAML file. So, well, I don't know. Let's give our application a run. Okay, enabled console. Oh, the application name there's my YAML. We will restart this. So there we go. Restart this web application. And let's see if the my YAML name comes up as the application name. Oh boy, we can't see that because I think we've turned off the banner mode. Okay, so we see that we don't have the banner mode and the console threshold is worn. Why don't we change that to info here and get all of our messaging back. And then we'll restart our web application. And let's see what kind of data we get here. Okay, starting web app using Java 21, got the process ID, port 8099. It's still pulling in that setting that we set at the virtual machine level. Okay, and we did get the info message back here. The banner mode is off. Oh, I thought I turned it on. So, okay, console. Let's turn that banner mode back on, do another reset here. And then we should be able to see the name of the application, my YAML name, and any of those other settings there that we've set up in the application. So there you go. My YAML name is now the name of the application. That is being pulled from the application.yaml file. And I don't know, I think that just looks nicer. It looks more handsome. And of course, if we actually change this, right? So Spring application.name, and we set it back to properties web. We've got my YAML name here, properties web over here. If I go back and restart this application, Well, you know it's the data that's in that application properties file that's going to take precedence, right? Properties web is now what comes up because, well, as we said, that application properties file overrides that YAML file. Okay, so there you go. A couple of important points. The fact that you can override those properties in different environments and with different targets. And the idea of using a YAML file, something that is more consistent with modern DevOps type of deployments. It's something that's available to you and something that might make your code a little bit easier to read. The application properties file is a bit easier to manage, and it certainly kind of keeps you up with the times. Boomer configuration on the left, Zoomer, young kid configuration on the right. That's what we want to do. We want to keep up with all those young kids. Okay. I think I said that I was going to show you how to configure your own properties with value and environment properties. That is what we're going to do next. I promise. I'm not lying to you this time. So we've seen how we can use the application properties to configure external resources like server ports and internal resources like logging and whether the banner comes up. Right now, I want to show you how to actually set your own properties and access them inside of your applications. And to do this, I've moved away from that Spring Web application. I've just got a standalone application here. You can see it implements command line runner, has that run method that will put stuff into. I've got a tutorial on the command line runner if you want to get more familiar with that. So this is just a basic Spring Boot application. It'll run at the command line. I did put a couple of my favorite application properties in here, just simplifying the logging. That's something that you're going to start doing all the time, every time you create a new application. And by the way, in the previous application that I had, I set a property to specify what the name of my banner was going to be. You actually don't need to do that. If you create your own banner, and just put it as banner.txt in resources, it'll actually run as the banner. It'll override the default one. So there you go. That's just a little trick for you. And I threw my name in there. Follow me on Twitter and YouTube at CameronMCNZ. So that's a good suggestion for you. But let's get back to this application here. Now, let's say there were just some properties that I wanted to configure, that I wanted to use in my application. I'd come over here. I'd look at my application properties file, and I would say, this is a new application. I should probably be using YAML. So I'll come over here and I'll create a new properties file, and I will call it application.yaml. Don't be afraid of the big bad YAML file, that's for sure. And I don't know, I'm going to keep track of, some of my favorite Canadian things. Now I think actually I've got to go over here, Window, Preferences, Editors, Text editors, and I think it will convert every single insert spaces for tabs. It'll try to convert every tab to a space, every space to a tab, which will kill me with YAML. So I made a quick setting change there. And I'm going to say how I want to list a bunch of my favorite things, and specifically, I want to list a bunch of my favorite Canadian things. CA, I think, is the country code for Canada, and what do I want to list? Well, I'm going to list what my favorite city is. Okay, so what is my favorite Canadian city? And so city will be, got to go to Montreal. If you've lived in North America all your life, and you just want to go, you got to go to Montreal. It's like stepping foot in Europe, but you haven't actually left the North American continent. You got to go there. And after that, Quebec City. I don't know, what's my favorite food? It's poutine, of course. And what's my favorite band? Well, I love the Lowest of the Low. It's them. So, this is just standard basic stuff, right? Just put some properties into your application. Life is good using YAML, so a little bit of a different structure. You could do favorite.ca.city inside of your regular application properties file. So I could optionally go favorite.ca.sport equals hockey. And that would be valid as well. It's not a great practice splitting things up between all of these files, but I mean, you can if you want to, but we want to try and stay with our YAML file. So now I've got a bunch of information about my favorite city, food, band, and what have we got over here? My favorite Canadian sport. Now, how do we access these in our code? Well, it's super simple. All you have to do is, well, first declare an instance variable. So I'll say string. And then what you do is you throw a value annotation on here. So at value. I do Control-Shift-O just to organize those imports. And then I'm going to put my cursor inside of those round brackets, press Control-Space, and notice that it's giving me the opportunity to select from some of these properties that have already been set. So I'm going to say the value will be favorite. Oh, no, actually the value will be, let's go, it's not favorite sport, that'll be favorite food. And so now what will happen when this application runs, it'll find my favorite food. It will inject that favorite food into this variable. And if I do a little system.out.println, my fave food is plus food. When I actually right click and say run as a Java application, what's it going to print out? It's going to print out that my favorite food is poutine. So we now see that the application is indeed running. I'm going to throw a little /n there just to put that on the next line. And what else did we have in there? We also had our favorite band. So we can ask for the favorite band. And so you can say value band. See how easy this is? All right, so I'm just pulling those fields out. Let's do a little copy and paste underneath. And my favorite band is plus band, and that should bring it out. Now also, we did put into application properties my favorite sport. Let's see if we can get it out of properties as well. And let me see, my favorite sport, make that sport. And then here we go. My favorite sport is, geez, I'm getting bad with this copy and paste. I gotta take copy and paste off my LinkedIn resume. My favorite sport is plus sport. And of course, the application properties has sport. The application YAML has city, food, and band. So I'm going to give this a run as a Java application, and now those value annotations are working. My favorite food is poutine, my favorite band is the lowest of the low, and my favorite sport is hockey. Everything's looking good. Now, what about my favorite YouTuber? So value, let's copy and paste this. What is my favorite YouTuber? We'll call it YouTuber. Uppercase T, lowercase t, I'm not sure. Now notice YouTuber's never been set. Right? My fave YouTuber is plus YouTuber. Okay, so there's no favorite YouTuber. There's no favorite YouTuber. Null pointer exception. Will we create a mini black hole and bring the world to an end? That's not good. Yeah. Injection of auto-wired dependencies failed. So there is no YouTuber. That's a drag. If there was only some way to set a default value, that's what I want to show you right here. We don't have the YouTuber set, but I can just say, hey, Scrumptious is my favorite YouTuber. Go check out her channel. And now I've set a default value. And if I run this application, say run as a Java application, my favorite YouTuber is Scrumptious. And so there you go. That's how you can actually get those default values into your properties as well. I think that is all super, super cool. Now, I will say that a property shouldn't necessarily be set as an instance variable. Like that's a heavy hammer to drop. creating like instance variables when we just want to use a variable at some point in time in your code, which is where the environment object comes in. So you can say, hey, I want to auto wire in an environment object. Control Shift O to make sure all of those get imported in. And rather than saying, I want to pull in, my favorite food and make it an instance variable, you can say nv dot, and it's got to be spelled correctly. I wish Spring and Java would fix that, where you have to spell things right. And what do we want to pull in here? We want to pull in our favorite food. Now this allows me to just do this inside the code. All I have to do is auto wire in the environment variable, and I no longer need that up there. So I can get rid of that. And similarly, I can, for band, I can put in the favorite band. Right? And to me, this, it might be more verbose in the code down here, but instance variables, they're configured and managed completely differently. And if you just want something in your code, like just a piece of text, it shouldn't be an instance variable, right? And your framework shouldn't influence your design, right? So just going to the environment and getting that information out, to me, is a lot better. So, and of course you can combine them, right? So I've got the value and I've got the environment variable there, but let's see if I can get the food and the band out without things blowing up. So I'll say run as a Java application, and you can see it's still bringing out all of that information I want. But instead of going through that value annotation and being forced to create an instance variable, I think it's a lot nicer design to actually just put that in your code. As I said, it might be a little bit more verbose, but to me, that's more natural. That makes a little bit more sense. But there you go. That's how easy it is to just access the properties in the application properties file and bring all that data right into your code. Now, there's actually a really cool way that you can actually create lists and create maps and even inner classes using some of these properties files. And that is what we're going to cover next. Okay, as you can see, my application's changed a little bit. I've cleaned things out just so that we're starting fairly fresh here. So there's nothing in my command line runner application there. I still have the application properties and application YAML files as before. But what I want to show you right here is how we can use something called configuration properties to not only get access to name value pairs in our application, but actually take data from a YAML file or a properties file and create lists and maps, and even lists and maps that have objects contained inside of them. So for example, let's just say, I wanted to put together a list of all of my favorite Canadian actors. So let me see, how easy would that be to do? Okay, so we're adding actors in there. We got Bill Shatner, John Candy, Ryan Reynolds, and Seth Rogen, a couple of Canadians. All the greatest Americans are Canadians, actually. Now, how do we actually bring that into our code and actually hold it as a list? There's a trick here. What you need to do is you need to actually create a brand new class and decorate it with a configuration properties annotation. So I'm going to just create a brand new class here, and I'm going to call it my favorite things. Just a simple Java class. And over here, I'm just going to throw on this configuration properties and component annotation, because I do want the Spring framework to pick it up. And what this configuration property says is it says, well, when this class runs, we're going to try and map all of the values in the application properties, the application YAML file, and we're going to try and map those properties onto components, Java Beans properties in that class. And specifically, we're going to find things under favorite.ca. So if we come over here, we can see it's favorite.ca.actors right here. And we've also got city, food, band, and artist. So, and I think over here, we've actually got sport. So let's come over here. Let's declare a couple of variables. I'm going to say string sport. I'll say string, what was another one here? String artist. And then why don't I actually just throw a list in here? A list of actors, right? We've got a bunch of actors over here that we are fans of. By the way, notice that the sport is an application property. So I'm just trying to show you that these can be pulled out of both YAML and application properties. I don't want to be creating the impression that this is a YAML only thing. But I got these favorite things here. Now that list, you see that? Do you see that red X there? Okay, if you see the red X, you need your eyes changed because that's a white X on a red background. But that's telling me that I need to organize my imports, bring in lists. So Control-Shift-O does that. You do need to add your setters and getters here. So I'm going to right click on this code and say source, generate setters and getters. Click all of those. And there are verbose. Our friendly little Java bean becomes crazy verbose, even separated the list there. That wasn't very nice. Okay, so yeah, your typical setters and getters, right? It does get a little verbose here, but that is what we deal with in Java. Okay, so now we've got this class. It's decorated with configuration properties. The properties, sport, artist, and actors, match what's under favorite.ca in both the YAML file and inside of the application properties file. Right? We got the favorite sport there. And we've also got this list of actors. And you can see in the YAML, we have a list of actors: Shatner, Candy, Reynolds, and Rogan. Now, all of those individual fields will be mapped to the strings. Those actors will be shoved into a list of strings as we run the application. So let's actually give this a little try. And so over here, I'm going to say, I'm going to do a little auto wiring first. So I'll say auto wired, and I'm going to auto wire in favorite things. Let's call it faves. Control-Shift-O, make sure that everything is in. And then over here, I'm just going to do system.out.println, and I don't know, faves dot, what do we got there? Faves dot artist. Okay, so we'll just print out the artist, and then system.out.println faves dot, what did we have? Artists. No, it was actors. Get actors. Dot get, I don't know, at 0. Okay, and so this should bring in the artist, my favorite artist, who is Ridley Bent, and show me actor at 0, who is the great William Shatner. And click Run as a Java application. And boom, over here we get my favorite artist, Ridley Bent. I could probably improve on the logging there, but there we go. Ridley Bent is printed out there, and then Shatner is printed out below. And as I said, I think probably, oh, we got a percentage new line there, so I'm surprised that formatting was ugly like that, but I'll deal with it. But now you can actually see that we've taken these fields inside the YAML file and we've actually brought them in. And here we've actually done just your standard, list string. But you can actually create a class. So I could actually create a class here, and I could call it invention. Okay, and I don't know, what are some inventions that Canadians have done? I guess for every invention there is an inventor, and then there's the thing that they discovered. So I'm just creating a basic Java class here with setters and getters. Okay, so everything looks good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some amazing Canadian inventions into the list. Now, we do have two properties, inventor and discovery. So on my application YAML file, well, I have to make sure that we've got two properties, insulin, Banting, basketball, Naismith. We got two basketballs there. Well, we have Java and Gosling, right? James Gosling invented Java. Basketball was invented by Canadian Namesmith. Insulin was invented by Banting. God bless you. And so now we've actually got some name value pairs there. Like we're actually going to map this text into an actual object in our code. So over at favorite things, I'm going to create a list, and this list is going to be of inventions. And I'll call it inventions. Now that variable name inventions there has to map that property name in the YAML inventions. But now in my code, if I actually run this application and say system.out.println faves.get, oh, I need to create my setters and getters. Source, generate getters and setters. You can't forget to do that. And then we come over here and we say faves.get inventions.get and 0 dot the discovery. And now when we run this application, the first discovery should map to Banting's insulin. And when we actually go ahead and run this application, boom, we get insulin printed out from line 22. So, it's not just name value pairs. We're actually converting this right into objects. And you can even put it into maps as well. So I'll do this one quickly for you. And I'm actually going to use application properties here. A lot of people think you can only do this in YAML, but that's not true at all. I'm going to add my favorite Ontario attraction, which is Niagara Falls, my favorite Alberta attraction, which is Banff, my favorite Nova Scotia attraction, which is Peggy's Cove, my favorite British Columbia attraction, which is the highway east to Alberta. And now I've got name value pairs, right? So the name is Ontario, the value is Niagara Falls. The name is Alberta, the value is Banff. This will map into, I guess it'll map into a map, right? So what I could say over here in my application is I also want to keep track of famous attractions. I want to hold it in a map. And let me see, I'm going to go over, okay, we've got that in name value pairs, just string. And then when we run the application, we should be able to print out, well, the individual attractions. I wonder if this will give me a nice output if I just say faves.get attractions. Oh boy, can you tell that I've been doing too much Python development lately? It's just not getting... I don't remember to create all of the setters and getters there. So we've got attractions. I want to right click and say source, generate getters and setters, get those attractions in there. Click save. And then over here in our applications, we should have get attractions. Let's see if that'll format that whole attractions object into some nice data for us. Some nice JSON. Okay, so I'm going to run this application now. Hold my breath, and there we go. Niagara Falls, Alberta, and Peggy's Cove. That's printing out the attractions. Again, this one was actually from the application properties file, not from the application YAML file. We mapped it to a list, not a map. There's our favorite things. And it all ran swimmingly. So I'm going to format that just a little bit. But there you go. That's how easy it is to use that application properties file along with a class that is annotated with that configuration properties annotation, both a YAML file and a properties file, and pull lists and maps. And I've got a tutorial on the server side that shows you how to do it with inner classes as well. It is a really, really powerful tool. Okay, I think that is all of the key stuff that you need to know in order to become very, very dangerous with Spring and Spring Boot application properties. Now, if you enjoyed that tutorial, if you learned something, why don't you head over to the serverside.com. I'm the editor-in-chief over there. We've got lots of great tutorials on Spring, Spring Boot, Java, DevOps, Git, GitHub, Scrum, Agile, you name it. If you're interested in my personal antics, follow me on Twitter at CameronMCNZ. I'd love to get a message from you. I'd love to see a comment in the comment section of this video. I do have a couple of books back there. So Hibernate Made Easy, Pickering is Springfield, all about the Simpsons. What is WebSphere that doesn't sell too well? And then also Darcy DeClute, Scrum Master Certification Guide. She's scrumptious on Twitter and YouTube. I helped with some of the final edits there. And a lot of people are using that book to score 100% on the Scrum Master and Product Owner exams. I used it to pass my PSM1 and PSM2 exams. So if you're agile and working with Scrum, you want to advance your career, pick that up over on Amazon. Highly recommend it. And then finally, if you're watching this on YouTube, well, why don't you subscribe on YouTube?